You are listening to Freedom Action, the forgotten German anti-Nazi uprising, 1945. Written and produced by Mark Felton for War Stories with Mark Felton. This is an audio episode. You've all heard of the German resistance to Hitler, most famously Count von Stauffenberg's bomb attack at the Wolf's Lair in July 1944. But most people have not heard of Captain Rupprecht Gerngross, an army officer who organized a resistance organization in Bavaria at the end of the war that actually staged a citywide uprising against the Nazis in Munich and several other towns, including at the town of Dachau, close to the infamous concentration camp. His story and the story of Bavarian freedom action is the subject of today's video. The wireless set crackled with static, then a voice began to speak clearly in German, a voice that had never been heard on air before, saying things that had never been heard in 12 years. It was the 27th of April 1945. In the small but extremely pretty market town of Dachau, a few miles from Munich, several local leaders gathered transfixed around the wireless set. "This is Bavarian Freedom Action," announced the voice on the radio. "We have taken control of the city of Munich in the name of Bavaria. We call on all patriotic German soldiers to resist the criminal National Socialists who have led Germany to absolute destruction." The voice at the microphone was Hauptmann Rupprecht Gerngross, a Wehrmacht veteran of Poland and the Eastern Front and a Bavarian right-wing nationalist. Standing before the microphone, he had altered his uniform, removing anything Nazi from it. His cap was no longer adorned with the eagle and swastika. The same had been unpicked and removed from above his left breast pocket. He had even removed the medals that he had won in combat, as their design incorporated Nazi symbols. Thus cleansed, he addressed Bavaria. Gerngross ended his speech by urging loyal Bavarians to immediately enact a great golden pheasant hunt. Golden pheasant was the nickname Germans had given to Nazi Party officials due to their brown and gold uniforms. For listeners who had been fed only Dr. Goebbels' propaganda for a dozen years, such revolutionary talk was absolutely electrifying. In Munich and in several surrounding towns, steps were soon underway to carry out Gerngross's plea, while the Gestapo and SS struggled to contain the rebellion. For the citizens of Dachau, however, there was even more at stake than just the liberation of their town from the Nazis. For close by was Dachau concentration camp, where over 30,000 people were barely clinging to life under brutal SS guards. Some of the townspeople of Dachau wanted to help the concentration camp prisoners. Others, of course, were fearful of the reaction of the Americans when they arrived. Captain Gerngross had been turned against the Nazis by what he witnessed in Poland, the massacre of unarmed Jewish civilians. By the 27th of April 1945, the Americans were fast approaching Munich. A member of Bavarian Freedom Action, Major Alois Braun, had already made contact with the advancing Americans on the 23rd of April, in the hope of negotiating their peaceful entry into the city. But Gauleiter Paul Giesler, the local party boss, was not prepared to surrender the city at any cost, and he had some serious backup in the form of troops from the 10th SS Panzer Division Fonsberg. The Bavarian resistance movement in Munich amounted to Hauptmann Gerngross and his 440-man interpreter company, along with some sympathetic Volkssturm Home Guards and some reservist Wehrmacht Landesschützen soldiers. On the 27th of April, the Bavarian nationalists rose, capturing the city hall, 2 radio stations, and the offices of the 2 Nazi Party daily newspapers. Gerngross immediately began broadcasting his call to arms. In Dachau town, preparations had already been underway for some weeks concerning what to do if the Americans approached. There was some agreement among the town's leaders that attempting to resist, as the dying regime's leadership had ordered all settlements, would only result in the destruction of their town by the US Army. As surrender was forbidden, the townspeople would have to rise up and overthrow the Nazi administration. A further problem was that Dachau had one of the largest concentration camps right on its doorstep, with a sizable SS Guard unit. There was also the moral obligation to do something for the camp inmates as well as their own town. Leading the resistors of Dachau was Georg Scherer. A passionate athlete and a communist, Scherer had been arrested for distributing anti-Nazi leaflets in 1935 and sent to Dachau. There he was severely beaten, but later in 1940 became a block leader and then the first camp elder. Whilst at Dachau, Scherer got to know Walter Neff, the head nurse in the prisoner hospital block. Neff had helped Scherer protect some of the camp's more vulnerable prisoners by hiding them in the camp hospital. Neff had ended up in Dachau in 1938 after planning a bombing attack on an army outpost in his native Austria. He had spent 9 months in solitary confinement, but later worked as a nurse. Controversially, Neff had been forced by the SS to participate in the T4 euthanasia program, selecting tuberculosis patients to be gassed at the Hartheim Institute. Scherer had been released in January 1941 and lived with his wife in Dachau town. He had kept in contact with Neff, who was also released. By early 1945, Walter Neff had absconded from his penal tank hunting company and returned to Dachau. With Jakob Schmidt and his friend, local glass painter Sirius Ebeler, the men had planned how to defend Dachau. Schmidt was a committed social democrat who had also spent time behind bars for his political beliefs. Some local Nazi sympathizers and even some officials were made privy to the conspirators' plans. These included Deputy Mayor Hans Zimmer, Police Chief Georg Engel, and tobacconist and SA or black shirt leader Michael Burger. The group's aims were to preserve Dachau town from American destruction, and Scherer also wanted to save as many of the prisoners at Dachau concentration camp as possible. This process had already started on the 25th of April when Scherer found shelter for a group of escaped prisoners. To make any of the plan a reality, the group needed soldiers. The only soldiers available were the locally raised Volkssturm unit of Home Guard reservists, numbering 130 men. The unit's company commander was Josef Lerchenberger, and the sergeant major a committed SA man, Michael Burger, who was already privy to the conspirators' plans. On the afternoon of the 28th of April 1945, the group made its move. It was a rainy and cool Saturday. A man loyal to the revolt replaced Volkssturm commander Lerchenberger, while the troops were deployed to guard the roads around the town hall and district administration. The local police remained passive and did nothing. Nazi Party district leader Hermann Nafziger and the SS-appointed mayor Hans Bauner were furious when armed men broke into their offices, but were in no position to argue. The only trouble came from Heinrich Niederhoff, an SA man who armed himself with a machine pistol and attempted to force his way into the heavily guarded town hall. A scuffle ensued with the Volkssturm on guard, and Niederhoff was shot dead. Unfortunately for the leaders of the revolt in Dachau town, a very senior Nazi general was billeted nearby with his large staff. It is believed that this officer was none other than the Inspector General of concentration camps, SS Obergruppenführer Oswald Pohl. As soon as reports reached him that there was an anti-Nazi uprising in Dachau, Pohl called for reinforcements. These came in the form of 3 companies of Panzergrenadiers from the still heavily armed 10th SS Panzer Division Fronsberg. The SS launched an immediate assault on the town hall. The battle was soon over. Though the rebels and the inadequately armed farmers of the Dachau Volkssturm fought with bravery and determination, the SS overcame resistance and stormed the building. Some escaped prisoners also fought alongside the rebels. 3 prisoners and 4 locals died during the fighting or were brutally executed immediately afterwards as a warning to the rest of the town. Their bodies were publicly displayed for all to see in the street opposite the town hall. Many of the rebels managed to flee into hiding, while several dozen Volkssturm were taken prisoner but later released. Though the actual armed rising in Dachau had been short and ineffective, Resistance had also sprouted in the towns of Landshut and Penzburg, requiring more SS and Gestapo troops to suppress. In Munich, a major battle flared between Bavarian Freedom Action Forces and those of Gauleiter Giesler. But, as in Dachau, the outcome was never really in doubt. SS troops managed to retake the newspaper offices and radio stations, but Munich City Hall held out for a time. Hauptmann Gerngross and many others managed to flee to safety before the building fell. Giesler's vengeance was terrible. He had 57 members of the resistance summarily shot. But nothing was going to stop the advance of the US Army, and the next day Gauleiter Giesler and the SS abandoned the city rather than fight to the last. Giesler fled to Berchtesgaden. The four rebellions at Munich, Dachau, Landshut and Penzburg had seriously unsettled the Nazis. If their own army and people were turning against them, perhaps it was time to flee. The Gauleiter of Bavaria, Paul Giesler, hid in Berchtesgaden, just below Hitler's private mountaintop retreat on the Obersalzberg, until he and his wife committed suicide on the 7th of May 1945. Oswald Pohl, if indeed it was him that ordered the crushing of the Dachau town revolt, was hanged at Landsberg prison in 1951 for crimes against humanity. For the leaders of the Dachau town uprising, their bravery in standing up to the Nazis was honoured. The dead are commemorated on a plaque on the town hall wall. Scherer served as deputy mayor until April 1952, while many of the other leaders and resistors continued to lead prosperous lives in the town after the war. In November 1946, 6 small streets around the town hall were renamed in honour of the fallen, and the plaza christened Resistance Square. The leader of Bavarian Freedom Action, Rupprecht Gerngross, the inspiration for the uprising at Dachau, survived the war and died in Munich in 1996 at the age of 80. You have been listening to Freedom Action, the forgotten German anti-Nazi uprising 1945, written and narrated by Mark Felton. For a wide variety of military history videos, please visit my other YouTube channel, Mark Felton Productions. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.